Okay, so this is a video that I've want to make for a while. I'm going to do this mini series on how the process I go about to build a custom connector. And so it's kind of a four-part process that I'm going to show using this flowchart. But basically, I know there's a lot of folks in the community who'd love to start building their own custom connectors who don't have experience with it. And so I'm going to show you my thought process that I do whenever I build a custom connector. The first question is, should I build a custom connector? And usually this answer is no. Usually you don't need to build a custom connector. I usually think that a custom connector is the last resort. Domo is such an awesome platform, and there's so many ways to easily get data into Domo. So what I would recommend is if you're having trouble finding a connector and it's not working, I would first come here and there's this video called Domo's Hidden Gems that they did in the Idea Exchange where Andy Beyer from Domo goes over his the hidden gems is what he calls them, but different connectors that you can do. And so in this video, I'd highly recommend you watch it. I learned things like the JSON no code connector, the webhook connector, email connector. I learned all of that from this video, so I'd highly recommend it. But if you are still set on building a connector, I would also recommend you check out this video, building a custom connector that Lacey Rogers did from Domo. She was on the connector team, and really great video. This is actually the first video I watched when I built my first connector, and I learned a ton from this video. So if you need a quick start guide, exit this video, go watch Lacey's video. It's probably much more informative. So I'm going to assume that you've already watched these videos. But like I said before, really be careful about building a custom connector. If you find that it is something that you have to do, then this video should be helpful. I always have a couple criteria, right? So I try and look through all the different connectors that Domo has. If I don't find one, the criteria I use is it has to meet two criteria. The first one is that it's actually going to provide meaningful business value that'll be helpful to the business. And the second is that it's such a common use case that I can see business analysts using my connector in the future, right? So if these two criteria are met, then I will build a connector. But if they're not both met, then I'll try and do something else, right? So for example, if business analysts aren't going to use it, then maybe I could just do some Python, right? Maybe I could do a PyDomo script to pull in data and automate it using a cron job or something like that, right? So I would really recommend that you think about it in that light. But anyway, I'm dividing this up into four parts. So first, we're going to talk about exploring API docs and authenticating with the API, which is half the battle. And these are the points I want to cover, right? So first of all, authentication is half the battle with custom connectors. I can't overstate this enough. It's really important that you figure out how to authenticate with the API or you're not going anywhere fast, right? So common authentication methods, basic, OAuth, NoAuth, API key, right? All those hopefully are explained in the doc. And so in today's video, we're going to go over a HubSpot connector that I decided to build. Second of all, pay special attention to pagination and rate limiting, right? So pagination is how the API deals with records, so how many records it'll return. And usually there's a limit and offset that you'll use. And then rate limiting is how often you're able to call the API, right? So maybe there's a daily limit or an hourly limit. These are very important, and you should probably look at this before you really get deep into development, right? Because let's say the rate limit is way too complicated or way too little that it's actually not worth it to build a connector. The last recommendation is to utilize test call functionality that are provided in the API docs if they have it. So a lot of APIs, public APIs are more sophisticated where they will show you how it's possible to make example calls. And then with those example calls, you could copy them into Postman, which I'll show in a later video with testing and documentation. But I'd really highly recommend that you don't try and rework the wheel, right? If people explain things really well in their docs, utilize those docs to accomplish what you're looking for. So to get started, the first thing, I am going to build a HubSpot connector. And the reason that I'm going to build it is because it satisfies the two criteria I talked about. My business users will probably use this in the future. And it's also going to provide meaningful business impact. And now you're wondering, right, there is a HubSpot connector already. Why am I going to build another one? Well, the reason is because if we come here to the FAQs, it'll show the endpoints that the connector is calling. And in this case, HubSpot, these guys can't decide how many versions of their API there should be. So there's a lot of versions. And in this case, I'm working with CRM data, and I'd love to get contacts, companies, and deals. But you can see all of these are from the V1 of the API, and they haven't been updated. HubSpot is now on V4. So in this case, these current connectors do not provide enough information, and that kind of motivated me to build this custom connector. And so HubSpot's also a very common CRM marketing tool, so I thought it'd be a great idea to kind of show you like raw how I build a custom connector, what my thought process is. And so, yeah, let's dive into it. Okay, so like I mentioned before, the first thing that I'm going to do is I created a free HubSpot account, just a free trial, and I'm also here on the HubSpot API developer docs. And the first thing I want to do is, I know they have a public API. I want to be able to authenticate it because to authenticate with it first, because that's definitely the most important thing. And so what I've done is if I come over here to the API docs, we can see that there is authentication section, and we can see most API endpoints support both OAuth and private app access tokens. Awesome. This is unfortunate. Unfortunately, an API key is really an easy way to authenticate with a API, but it looks like they had deprecated it. So we're actually going to have to go with OAuth or private app access token. So private apps, that's kind of new to me. So I'm going to come here into private apps and take a look. And it looks like it's similar to a Salesforce app. But let's see. Authenticate. Okay. So it looks like it looks like it still acts like an API key. So I'm going to probably follow these instructions and create a private app. So let's see. Okay, looks pretty straightforward. So let's come back here to my developer and let's come to settings, integrations. Let's see, private apps. Okay, so let's see here. Create a private app. Let's call this Domo connector. And let's see, scopes. We just need CRM stuff. So I'm just going to come here and we're just reading CRM objects. So let's just select all of these. And let's go forward. Oh, unavailable. Okay. Cool. Create app. Okay. And then this is probably going to give us a token. Okay, cool. So now let's copy this token. So I'm just going to copy this real quick. Cool. So now I think I have an authentication method. And now I'm going to come back to the developer docs and I'm looking for the CRM stuff. So I want to get, like I said, some CRM objects. And let's see. If we come back here, we want API reference docs. And let's just see if we can figure out how to authenticate. And okay, let's see. CRM, objects, companies. Cool. So let's come here and let's take a look at these docs. And so I'm going to come to endpoints. And like I said, in this case, it looks like they do have some test functionality, which is awesome because that's going to help me kind of be able to much easier explore the API. So I'm just going to scroll down a bit because I'm looking to see if there is an API endpoint where I can just list all of the companies. So yeah, so let's see. This looks promising. Get companies. Okay, cool. And so now, like I said, there's this functionality over here where I can test call. So make a test call using private app token. And let's paste in my private app token that I copied. And let's see if this will authenticate. Okay, cool. So yeah, first of all, we got a 200 response, which looks great. And it looks like it returns back an object called results that has an array of objects in it. And it looks like this is what we're looking for. This API is pretty well, right? So it's nice. It gives us an example, gives us a schema that shows us all the different things that are in it, which is cool. So that's awesome. Let's see if it's just as easy. So that's pretty awesome because it's just a really GET request. Let's see if contacts is the same thing. I'm going to come over here to contacts. Endpoint, you can see there's a run in postman button. That's very helpful. And let's see contacts. Is there another just basic? Yeah, get contacts. Let's try this again. We'll go to private app access token, paste that in, send a request. Cool. And it comes back and it looks like this is the data that I need. Yep. Awesome. So in this tutorial, I'm just going to create reports for contacts, companies, and deals in HubSpot. And like I mentioned here, I have to pay special attention to pagination and rate limiting. So in this case, I think I saw something about rate limiting back here where when I created my private app, if I come back here to private apps, I think it'll tell me API usage. Cool. So this is an API call counter, 250,000 calls per day. I think that's definitely plenty for my use case, right? Like I'm not going to be calling this API more than a couple times a day. So I think that'll be plenty, but that's good to know. And now with pagination, if I come back here, usually the API will tell you a little bit more about pagination. In this case, it shows that it gives me a limit, and it looks like I can adjust the limit. And then after, let's see, it looks like it's a paging cursor. So I think what that means is that at the end of the call, it'll give me a page and say when the next one, what's the next number for the offset, something like that. But in this case, like I know, like, most APIs, I always try and increase the limit, right? In this case, 10 would mean a lot of API calls. So that would mean rate limiting could come into effect. So I would probably come up and, increase this by something. And so usually the API will tell you if it's too big, right? So in this case, if I try this, it'll probably say that it's too much. Yeah. Okay, so only 100 can be, yeah. So in this case, that kind of confirms that I can only do 100, which is much better than 10, but let's try that again one more time and see if I can send the request. Cool. Okay. Yep. So now we know that limit is 100, and then if we come to the end of our payload, we can see that there is a pagination, and it actually gives you a link, so you could just copy this link, it looks like. And so we'll dive into that in the next section. But this kind of covers the first part, right? This is probably, it's a more exploratory part, but like I said, definitely important to authenticate with the API to make sure it's worth it. And I would just, caution people, making custom connector, it's usually your last resort. If you'd like to learn more, we're going to go through the rest of these sections, so stay tuned.